The first light of dawn crept slowly across the horizon, spilling pale gold over the vast Miller farmland. A cool breeze carried the earthy scent of soil that had been turned and tended for generations. The land stretched wide, acres of crops, fences that seemed endless, and a weathered barn that stood like a quiet witness to decades of hard work. At exactly 4:45 a.m., as it had for nearly 40 years, Thomas Miller woke up. No alarm clock, no second call, just habit. He sat up on the edge of his bed, rubbed his hands together, and took a slow breath. Outside, the world was still half asleep. But not him. Not anymore. That kind of life had left him long ago. Within minutes, he was dressed, boots laced, hat in hand. By 5 a.m., he was already walking. The same path, every day. Thomas stepped out onto the porch and paused for a moment, scanning the land like he always did. To anyone else, it looked like nothing had changed. But Thomas noticed everything. The way the wind bent the crops slightly to the east. The dryness in the upper soil. A loose plank near the fence line. These weren't things he thought about. They were things he knew. Because he had seen them 1,000 times before. He walked the same path every morning. Past the old well, along the fence, across the edge of the north field, and finally to the barn. It wasn't routine anymore. It was instinct. Inside the barn sat his old red tractor. Its paint had faded. Its engine coughed when it started, and its seat had been repaired more times than anyone could count. But it worked. Thomas placed his hand on it gently, almost like greeting an old friend. "Let's get to work," he muttered. The engine roared to life. Rough, uneven, but dependable. A different mindset. Across the yard, leaning against the barn door, Jake Miller watched the entire scene with growing frustration. He had been up early too. But not because of habit. Because he couldn't sleep. His mind was filled with numbers, ideas, comparisons, videos he had watched, farms he had seen online, success stories of people who modernized and doubled their profits in months. And then there was this. His father. Still doing things the same way. Still trusting an old machine. Still believing that hard work alone was enough. Jake shook his head. "This isn't the 1980s anymore," he whispered under his breath. He walked toward the tractor, waiting until his father turned it off after a short inspection run. "We need to talk," Jake said. Thomas wiped his hands with a cloth and nodded. "We always need to talk. What's on your mind today?" Jake took a deep breath. "This farm is falling behind." Thomas didn't react. "That's so." "Yes. I've been checking other farms. Bigger yields, faster production, less labor. They're using modern equipment, technology, efficiency." Thomas leaned against the tractor. "And we're not." Jake gestured toward the machine. "That thing barely starts." "It starts," Thomas replied calmly. "That's not the point," Jake snapped. "We're wasting time, energy, money." Thomas looked at him for a long moment. "You think faster means better." "I think smarter means better," Jake shot back. Thomas nodded slowly. "And you think I haven't been thinking?" Jake hesitated, but only for a second. "I think you've been repeating. The argument that changed everything." The air grew tense. Thomas straightened up, his expression firm now. "Repeating," he said quietly. "That's what you see." Jake crossed his arms. "Yes." Thomas stepped closer. "I wake up every day before the sun. I check the soil, the water, the fences. I know when a storm is coming before the clouds even form. I know which patch of land needs rest and which needs work." "And you call that repeating?" Jake didn't back down. "It's not enough anymore." Silence. A long, heavy silence. Finally, Thomas spoke again. "This, repeating, built everything you see." Jake looked around, but instead of pride, he felt pressure. "And it might also be what destroys it," he said. That was the moment something shifted between them. Not anger, not even disappointment, just distance. The decision. That night, Jake sat alone in his room, staring at his phone. Videos played one after another. Modern farms, massive tractors, automated systems, success stories with titles like, "How I Doubled My Farm Income in 1 Year." Every clip fed the same thought. "You're wasting time." He opened a notebook and started writing numbers. Costs, loans, expected returns. At first, the numbers scared him. Then they excited him. "This is it," he whispered. This is how we fix everything. He didn't tell his father. Not because he wanted to betray him, but because he already knew the answer he would get. No, and Jake was tired of hearing that. The loan. 2 days later, Jake drove into town. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he pulled up to the bank. This wasn't just a decision. It was a risk, a big one. Inside, he sat across from a loan officer, explaining his plan with confidence he didn't fully feel yet. 3 tractors, the officer repeated. Yes, that's a significant investment. I've done the math, Jake said quickly. Increased output, reduced labor time, we'll recover the cost within 2 years. The officer studied him carefully. And your father agrees. Jake paused. He will. It wasn't a lie. Not yet. The delivery day. A week later, the deal was done. Papers signed. Loan approved. Machines purchased. Jake stood near the farm entrance early that morning, heart racing. Then he heard it. The deep rumble of engines. 3 massive tractors appeared on the dirt road, shining under the sunlight like something out of a dream. They were everything the old one wasn't. Fast, powerful, modern. Jake smiled wide. This changes everything. The drivers stopped near him. Where do you want them? Jake turned toward the farm, and pointed inside. Right there. As the machines rolled closer, the ground itself seemed to tremble. For the first time, Jake felt like he was in control. Like he had taken the future into his own hands. A quiet doubt, but as the tractors reached the gate, something felt off. The entrance looked narrower than he remembered. The turn, tighter. The space, smaller. One of the drivers slowed down. These are big machines, he said. You sure they'll fit? Jake hesitated. Just for a second. Then he nodded. They will. Because they had to. Because if they didn't, everything he had just done would fall apart. The waiting. The tractors stopped just outside the gate. The engines idled. The sound filled the air. Jake checked his watch. His father would be back soon. For a brief moment, excitement and anxiety mixed inside him. Would his father be proud? Angry? Or would he finally understand? Jake looked at the machines again. They'll see, he whispered. Everyone will see. But deep inside, a small voice asked a quiet question. Did you really think this through, or did you just rush ahead? Jake ignored it, because sometimes, the hardest thing to face is doubt in your own decision. And as the sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the farm gate, Jake stood there waiting. Not just for his father, but for the moment everything would change. The sun had barely risen when Jake was already outside. He hadn't slept much. Excitement had turned into uneasiness, and uneasiness into a restless kind of energy that wouldn't let him stay still. The 3 massive tractors stood just beyond the gate, silent now, their engines cold, their polished surfaces reflecting the pale morning light. Yesterday, they had felt like victory. Today, they felt like a question. Jake walked toward them, running his hand along the smooth metal of the nearest one. It was perfect. Every detail engineered for efficiency, power, speed. This is the future, he muttered. But something didn't feel right. He climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine roared to life with a deep, confident hum. The sound alone made him feel in control again. See, he said to himself. No problem. He pressed forward gently. The tractor moved, slowly at first, then steadily toward the gate. The first attempt. As the machine approached the entrance, Jake adjusted the wheel slightly, trying to line it up perfectly. The wooden posts on either side of the gate stood firm, old, weathered, slightly crooked from years of sun and rain. Jake leaned forward, focusing. Just a little more. The tractor edged closer, closer. Then, stop. A sharp, unmistakable resistance. The side of the tractor brushed against one of the posts with a dull, heavy thud. Jake froze. He reversed slightly, heart pounding. No, 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 no. He tried again, this time adjusting the angle more carefully. Again, the tractor moved forward. Again, thud. The space was too tight. Jake's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Maybe I just need a better angle. Second attempt. Then third. He backed up farther this time, giving himself more room. He turned wider, approached slower. Sweat began to form on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Come on. The tractor inched forward, closer, closer. Then the same result. It wouldn't fit. Jake slammed his hand against the wheel. This doesn't make sense. He jumped down from the tractor and paced near the gate, studying it like he could force it to change just by looking harder. The opening suddenly seemed smaller than ever before. How did I not notice this? He whispered. The father arrives. Behind him, he heard footsteps. Slow, familiar. Jake turned. Thomas stood a few steps away, watching quietly. He had been there long enough to understand everything. You started early, Thomas said calmly. Jake ran a hand through his hair. They won't go in. Thomas nodded slightly, as if confirming something he already knew. I can see that. Jake pointed at the gate. It's too narrow. Yes. The single word landed heavier than any lecture. Jake frowned. Why didn't you tell me? Thomas looked at him steadily. You didn't ask. The truth at the gate. Jake let out a frustrated breath. I thought this would fix everything. Thomas walked closer to the gate, placing his hand on one of the wooden posts. I've walked through this gate every morning for 40 years, he said. In the rain, in the heat, in the dark. He tapped the wood gently. I know exactly how wide it is. I know how deep the posts go. I know what runs underneath. Jake's frustration began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of realization. What runs underneath? He asked quietly. Irrigation lines, Thomas replied. Old ones. Fragile. If you move these posts without care, you risk breaking the entire system. Jake looked down at the ground. The problem wasn't just the gate. It was everything connected to it. The weight of a decision. Jake stepped back, staring at the tractors again. They're useless like this. Thomas shook his head. No tool is useless, only misunderstood. Jake let out a bitter laugh. That doesn't help. Thomas crossed his arms. You saw a problem and rushed to solve it with something bigger, he said. Faster. Stronger. Jake looked away. I thought that's what smart people do. Thomas nodded. Smart people observe first, act second. Silence filled the space between them. The tractors stood still. The gate stood firm. And Jake stood somewhere in between, caught between intention and consequence. Breaking point. I took a loan, Jake admitted quietly. Thomas didn't react immediately. How much? Jake hesitated, then said it. The number felt heavier out loud. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. That's not a small mistake, he said. I know, Jake replied, voice low. It could cost us everything. I know. The honesty in Jake's voice changed something. For the first time, this wasn't an argument. It was reality. The lesson begins. Thomas stepped closer to his son. Do you know why I walk the same path every morning? He asked. Jake shook his head. It's not just to check the farm, Thomas said. It's to stay connected to it. To notice the small changes before they become big problems. He pointed toward the gate again. This didn't become narrow overnight. It has always been this way. But you never noticed, because you never made a habit of looking. Jake felt the truth hit hard. He had lived here his whole life. But he had never really seen it. A new understanding. So what do we do now? Jake asked. Thomas looked at the tractors, then back at the land. We don't panic, he said. We don't rush. Jake nodded slowly. We think. Rebuilding the right way. Over the next few days, something changed. Jake started waking up early. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to understand. He walked with his father. At first, it felt pointless. Boring. Slow. But then he began to notice things. The slight slope of the land. The areas where water collected. The weak spots in the fence. The exact width of the gate. Things that had always been there, but had never mattered to him before. Solving the problem. Instead of forcing the tractors through the gate, they made a plan. A real one. They mapped the land, studied the irrigation lines, calculated costs carefully. Jake sold one tractor to reduce the debt. They modified another for smaller, specific tasks. And the third, they kept, but only after designing a new entry point to the farm that wouldn't damage anything. It took time, effort, patience, everything Jake had tried to skip before. The gate becomes a reminder. Weeks later, Jake stood at the same gate. But this time, he didn't see it as an obstacle. He saw it as a lesson. He placed his hand on the wooden post, just like his father used to. You saved the farm, Jake said quietly. Thomas shook his head. No, he replied. The farm was always here. He looked at Jake. You just learned how to see it. Moral of the story. Rushing into big decisions without understanding the small details can lead to failure, even with the best intentions. True success comes from consistent habits, patience, and deep awareness of what you already have. When you build the habit of paying attention, you don't just avoid mistakes, you create better solutions.